Welcome to Anews. I'm Omar Taslim, and you're watching Turkiye's Diplomacy. On today's episode, Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar and political analyst Javed Rana will be joining me to discuss the top developments from the world of international affairs. We'll analyze the E.P.C summit held in Albania, Trump's visit to the Middle East, and Israel's increasing attacks in the occupied Gaza Strip. But before we begin our discussions, let's take a look at this news report.
Geçmişte Avrupa'da yaşanan birçok savaş ve ihtilaf bize göstermiştir ki savunma ve güvenlik gibi son derece hayati olan konularda bölündükçe zayıflıyoruz, birleştikçe güçleniyoruz.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan delivered a powerful message at the 6th European Political Community Summit in Albania on Friday, urging European leaders to embrace unity in the face of mounting security threats.
Ukrayna'da silahların susması ve barış zemininin oluşturulması için kritik bir dönemeçteyiz. Geçmişte olduğu gibi bugün de kapsamlı bir ateşkes öncelikli olmak üzere çözüme dönük çabaların her birine katkı sağlıyoruz.
The Turkish leader reaffirmed Turkey's ongoing commitment to peace efforts, noting that Ankara continues to support every initiative aimed at achieving a comprehensive ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine.
Mart 2022'den bu yana ilk kez akan kanı durdurma noktasında önemli bir fırsat penceresi aralandı. Bunun heba edilmemesi gerektiğine inanıyorum. Her zaman ifade ettiğim gibi adil bir barışın kaybedeni olmayacaktır. Türkiye bu süreçte üzerine düşenleri yapmaya devam edecektir.
Turning to the situation in Gaza, the Turkish president condemned Israel's expansionist policies, calling upon European nations to step up, saying,
Netanyahu'nun uzlaşmaz, saldırgan ve kibirli tutumu Gazze ile birlikte tüm bölgemizi, burada yaşayan farklı inançlardan insanları da tehlikeye atıyor. Gazze'de ateşkesin tesisi için de Avrupa'nın gereken iştiyak ve ilgiyi göstermesini bekliyoruz.
Welcome back to the program. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakanar, a very warm welcome to you as well.
Thanks for hosting me, Omar.
Mustafa, let's start our discussions with the 6th European Political Community Summit that took place in Albania last week on Friday. Now, President Erdoğan was also attending the summit. There were some key negotiations about the war in Ukraine. They discussed energy, connectivity, and transatlantic relations as well in the light of Trump's new policies with Europe. So, Mustafa, let's start. Tell me about what happened at the summit and what was Turkey's position at the E.P.C summit in Albania.
Omar, last Friday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan participated in the 6th European Political Community Summit in Albania, and he met with some important European leaders, including French President Emmanuel Macron and Germany's new Chancellor Friedrich Merz, on the sidelines of this important summit. And he also addressed the opening session of the European Political Community Summit. President Erdoğan called for unity and solidarity among European nations to address the common security challenges. As you know, there is still ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia in Eastern Europe. As you know, Turkey last week hosted some important talks among Ukrainian, Russians and Americans to reach a ceasefire and peace between two warring sides. And President Erdoğan called on the European nations to support Turkey's peace efforts between Ukraine and Russia. As you know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan also reiterated that there will be no losers in peace and there will be no winners at at the war. And within this context, President Erdoğan reiterated Turkey's strong determination to facilitate and mediate talks between Ukraine and Russia in terms of ending the ongoing conflicts in the region. Turkey is still seeking European help for putting an end to the ongoing conflicts between Ukraine and Russia. As you know, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan has been in contact with both Ukrainians and Russians to discuss what can be done in terms of reaching a ceasefire or peace, a long-standing peace. Within this context, as you know, Europeans are also trying to create their own army to deal with the security challenges on the old continent. As you know, Donald Trump is taking some steps to end war between Ukraine and Russia, and United States is sometimes criticizing Europeans' attitude towards the war between Ukraine and Russia, and it is raising concerns among the European leaders over U.S. security commitment to Europe. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan clearly stated that Turkey is supporting European Union's efforts to create their own army, but Turkey is also reiterating that the European army shouldn't be separate from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As you know, Turkey is the member of the NATO, but Turkey is not member of the European Union, and Turkey doesn't want to be separated from the European security architecture. Within this context, I can clearly say that Turkey will continue to take steps to ensure long-standing peace and stability in the European continent.
Mustafa, last week was a very exciting week for Turkish diplomacy. There was a NATO foreign ministers meeting, then Ukraine and Russia and American officials, they were in Istanbul to discuss a ceasefire, which unfortunately did not happen. And then Turkish foreign minister, we should be giving him the entire credit for engaging in such diplomatic measures. He was also in Saudi Arabia over the weekend. So tell me about the Turkish diplomacy, Mustafa, over the last week. What happened? What were the key events?
Well, as you know, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed direct talks with Ukraine in Turkey's financial and cultural capital, Istanbul, to discuss possible ceasefire terms and peace between two warring sides. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky immediately responded to Putin's proposal by saying that I will be waiting for Russia's leader in Turkey. But Putin didn't show up in Turkey to participate in the peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Zelensky paid an official visit to Turkey's capital, Ankara, last Thursday to meet with his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. And Ukrainian and Russian delegations also came to Turkey to meet with each other. And it was the first time for Ukrainian and Russian delegations to come together in over 3 years. As you know, 3 years ago, Turkey also was able to bring together warring sides to discuss possible ceasefire and truce. And last week, Putin didn't show up in Turkey, but Zelensky came to Turkey. And Trump was paying an official visit to the Middle East last week. He also said that maybe he would participate in the peace talks in Istanbul if Putin shows up. But they didn't come. But U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio came to Turkey for NATO Foreign Ministers meeting in Antalya. Following the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting, he also came to Istanbul to participate in the trilateral talks between Turkey, Russia, and Ukraine. But they didn't reach an agreement over ceasefire or peace, but they reached an agreement over the prisoners of exchange of prisoners of war between two warring sides. Yes, Turkey facilitated and mediated the talks between Ukraine and Russia, but Turkey is also seeking international help to put an end to the ongoing war between Ukraine and Russia. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan have been increasing and engaging talks with several world leaders to take their support for ending the war between Ukraine and Russia. Within this context, I can clearly say that Turkey has become the center of regional and global peace diplomacy in recent years, and I think that Turkey's efforts to reach peace between Ukraine and Russia will yield positive results not only for the Ukrainians and Russians, but also for the entire European continent.
Mustafa, before we discuss the war in Ukraine in depth, I want to ask you about, like you just mentioned, that Turkey is also seeking international support and help to end this war. But at this point, President Trump and the European Union, they have their differences. The Europeans are not seeking an end to the war because they're still continuing to supply Ukraine with weapons, and they've also said that they might put boots on the ground, which is not sure for now. And President Trump, on the other side, says that he wants to end the war as quickly as he can by involving both leaders from Russia and Ukraine. So, Mustafa, what are the differences that are between the two sides, between the United States and Europe? What are the differences, and why are they not trying to end those differences to bring the war in Ukraine to an end?
Umar, as you know, U.S. President Donald Trump is seeking immediate cessation of war between Ukraine and Russia. But on the other hand, Europeans are still reaffirming their strong support for Ukraine's political sovereignty and territorial integrity. As you know, Russia in 2014 annexed Ukraine's Crimea, and no one from the Western countries is recognizing the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. But United States is claiming that if there will be peace between Ukraine and Russia, there is supposed to be confessions from both sides. And some news articles from the United States are indicating that the Trump administration is currently willing to recognize the illegal annexation of Crimea by Russia. But we know that Ukrainian decision makers are determined to liberate Crimea from the Russian occupation. I think Crimea will be key topics between regional and international stakeholders to deal with in terms of resolving the Ukraine-Russia conflict. On the other hand, as you know, Trump secured a minerals deal with Ukraine. And Trump, as you know, threatened Ukraine to withdraw its military support for the Ukrainian defense forces, and Europeans are trying to ensure Ukraine's security and political stability by giving military support to Ukraine. But I don't think that Ukraine can continue its actions against Russian aggression without strong support coming from the United States. I think that both the United States and European nations will be supposed to find a common way and common sense to deal with the common security challenges in the European continent. Otherwise, we can see further transatlantic rift between important allies within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Well, so let's talk about the war in Ukraine. So last Friday, Russian, Ukrainian, Turkish officials were in Istanbul, and they were discussing an end to the war, right? That did not happen. Neither did we achieve a ceasefire. But one thing that came out of that meeting was the exchange of 1,000 prisoners of war. So now tell me about this, Mustafa. How important is this? Because Marco Rubio said that this would indeed lead, or could potentially lead, to a ceasefire. And Hakan Fidan has also stated the same thing. He has said we were expecting the leaders to be at the meeting, but Putin did not show up. So, Mustafa, at what stage are we in this war? Because Russia keeps attacking Ukraine, and Ukraine says that we need a ceasefire. If that is not happening, what do you think could happen over the next few days or even weeks? Because this war is definitely not going to end in a few days.
Well, it is crystal clear that Friday talks between Ukraine and Russia were the very beginning of the new era in terms of resolving the conflicts. And today, U.S. President Donald Trump is slated to hold phone conversations with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian leader Vladimir Putin, respectively. I think Putin will try to reach immediate ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. But I don't think that Ukraine and Russia will immediately halt their hostilities in the Eastern Europe, because, as we say, there are many complex issues between two important neighbors in the Eastern Europe to cope with. Crimea issue will be on the table. Also, Russia is calling for lifting of sanctions imposed by the Western countries. On the other hand, European nations are willing to exclude Russia from the negotiating table, and these issues, I think, are obstructing any peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. Maybe there will be some truce agreement between two warring sides, but I don't think that these truce deals will be permanent. I think if the international community wants to see long-standing peace and stability in the Eastern Europe, and if they want to halt war between Ukraine and Russia, I think they are supposed to find a common way and common sense in terms of dealing with the common security challenges. I think both the regional and international stakeholders will be supposed to take Turkey's security demands into the consideration, because Turkey is always calling for balanced approach to the Ukraine-Russia war. Turkey is claiming that both sides should sit at the same negotiating table to discuss the peace terms and ceasefire terms. I think Turkey will continue to take steps to increase the international awareness about the importance of peace and stability in the European continent.
Mustafa, thanks for that analysis. Now let's take a look at this news report, and we'll be right back.
The Israeli military launched a wide-ranging ground offensive in the war-ravaged Gaza Strip, escalating its months-long assault on the blockaded territory. Israeli troops began a broad ground operation throughout the northern and southern Gaza Strip, under what the army calls Operation Gideon's Chariots. Since the beginning of the Israeli campaign in October 2023, more than 53,300 Palestinians, the majority women and children, have lost their lives. The deepening crisis has drawn international condemnation and legal scrutiny. In November, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, citing war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Gaza. In parallel, Israel is also facing a genocide case at the International Court of Justice. Despite mounting global pressure, the Israeli military has vowed to continue its offensive until Hamas is dismantled. However, rights groups warn that the humanitarian toll of the operation has reached catastrophic levels, with large parts of Gaza now uninhabitable and basic services on the verge of collapse.
Welcome back to the program. Now let's take a look at the front page of Daily Sabah. Mustafa, the first headline that I can see here is about Gaza. And again, Israel is not stopping with its attacks. It has killed over 200 people now. Around 100 people were killed over the weekend as well. Bombing hospitals, that has continued. But Mustafa, I want to start with the PKK threat. Now that the PKK threat has gone, this is part of the Terror-Free Turkey initiative. Tell me more about this, Mustafa.
Omar, as you know, PKK terrorist organization last week announced its decision to dissolve itself and lay down their weapons. As you know, last year, opposition Nationalist Movement Party leader Devlet Bahçeli proposed Terror-Free Turkey initiative. And within this context, Turkish government since then has been taking steps to realize the dream of terror-free Turkey. And pro-PKK political party in Turkey also paid a visit to İmralı Island, and PKK's ringleader, imprisoned ringleader Abdullah Öcalan in February urged the separatist terror group to dissolve itself and lay down their weapons. And last week, PKK announced its decision to disband itself and lay down their weapons. Right now, Turkish political leaders and military installations are closely watching the developments about PKK process. I think it will yield positive results in terms of ensuring Turkey's national security and political stability. It will also yield positive results for the regional peace and security. As you know, PKK was not only operating in Turkey. PKK is also operating in Iraq and Syria. As you know, PKK was using Iraq as a base to launch attacks against Turkey's territory, and PKK terrorist group Syrian offshoot PYD-YPG reached an agreement with the new rulers in Syria, and Syrian security forces will take the control of the northern part of the country occupied by the PKK-YPG dominated SDF. I hope that Turkey, Iraq and Syria will take further steps to deal with the PKK problem, and it will bring long-standing peace and stability to the Middle East region.
Mustafa, also today is 19th May. Turkey is marking the Sports and Youth National Day. Tell us more about this. Tell our audience about what happens on this specific day.
Umar, today the Turkish nation is marking the commemoration of Atatürk Youth and Sports Day. As you know, Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk initiated the Turkish nation's struggle for independence by going to Samsun in May 1999, and it started Turkish nation's struggle for independence. And in 1922, as you know, the Turkish nation fought against the imperial Western powers, and Turkey ensured its independence from the occupying powers. Turkey defeated Greek powers in Anatolia, supported by the Western imperialist powers. And since then, the Turkish nation has been commemorating the May 19 as the commemoration of Atatürk Youth and Sports Day. Within this context, I wish Allah's mercy upon all Turkish soldiers and Turkish people who sacrificed their lives for Turkey's independence and future.
Mustafa, let's talk about the other headlines that are there. Obviously, there's Russia, Turkish diplomacy. We were talking about it, how Hakan Fidan and Turkish President Erdoğan have been involved in a week of heavy diplomatic traffic. Mustafa, let's talk about this one. A new Black Sea gas discovery is going to bolster Turkey's geopolitical future. Tell me more about this.
Umar, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan last Saturday announced a new gas discovery for Turkey. And as you know, Turkey has been drilling both in the Black Sea and Mediterranean to find natural resources and to utilize them for the Turkish people. And President Erdoğan announced that Turkey found new gas in the Black Sea region. It is projected to increase Turkey's independence in the energy field. As you know, Turkey is seeking to be independent in all fields, particularly in the energy area, and it will boost Turkey's independence in the energy field. As you also know, Turkey is trying to be a hub between Europe and Eastern countries. I think that Turkey will continue to take steps to make realize the independent Turkey for the energy geopolitics in the region.
Mustafa, thanks for that analysis. We'll continue to keep an eye on these top headlines. Obviously, there's Syria, there's Turkish diplomacy, and the war in Ukraine. Now let's take a look at this news report, and we'll be right back.
Israel's relentless bombardment forced Palestinians to flee their homes and shelters in the built-up Jabalia refugee camp. Many families were seen walking in the streets, carrying whatever they could of their belongings.
كل يوم رعب، بنعيش في رعب، نصحى في رعب، بننام في رعب، اطفالنا في رعب، ولا اكل ولا جوع، اللي بيحكي معاك الاسبوع يا دوب باكل شوي، مش قادرين اقسم بالله ما احنا قادرين نتعب.
Residents put their belongings and children on their backs and on donkey-driven carts to evacuate from the area.
والناس بتنزح بفش اكل، ناس جعانين فش طحين، وهنا زي ما انتم شايفين بنجر، المواصلات غاليه يا عم، واحنا بنشهد العرب انهم يتحركوا، ما ينفعش شيء، لا امتى لما نموت كلنا.
Gaza health authorities said that most of those killed on Saturday were in towns on the northern edge of the enclave, including Beit Lahia and the Jabalia refugee camp, as well as in the southern city of Khan Yunis.
Welcome back to the program. Now joining us live from the Pakistani capital is political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Javed, let's start with the situation in Israel. Israel has attacked the occupied Gaza Strip once again, killing over 200 people and bombing hospitals. What's the latest, Javed?
Well, I think the tragedy has been trivialized. Genocide has been trivialized, normalized in Gaza. And I think the apathy of the international community, the world, Arab world, the Muslim world, that is so huge that I am losing the words to explain the scale of that apathy. Now, again, in a broader picture, if you see this war theater, this genocidal theater, in last 1 hour, I mean, it's just a couple of hours ago. I mean, just trying to give you scale of the oppression. In 1 hour, 30 airstrikes were conducted in the southern part of the Gaza, which means that Israel is using artificial means, AI, through which the bombing is being conducted, house by house. And then they're looking at the people. When they reach their home, they're killing them. It's a clear genocide. But the point is, no one is raising voice. For everybody, it is something which is normal. I cannot recall any time in the recent history where the people will be so much immune to the tragedy, so much immune to the genocide. No one is speaking in a meaningful manner. These are all political rhetorics coming from the different parts of the world. And people feel this has to happen. No one can stop Israel. You may recall Karim Khan, the prosecutor, the International Criminal Court. His bank accounts have been blocked. His email accounts of Microsoft have been blocked. There is a ban on his traveling. There is a ban on all staff of the International Criminal Court. That is a message Israel has been sending to anyone who wants to deliver justice. And that is a message to the world that Israel enjoys impunity. Anyone tries to touch it, anyone tries to hold it accountable, all those tentacles through which Israel would be held accountable, those would be punished. So again, International Criminal Court has been sanctioned in a manner that I have never seen. Now all these so-called Microsoft and other platforms on internet, they're hugely biased. They are playing into the hands of the apartheid Jewish state. I think that is a bigger tragedy. That is a bigger tragedy, and nobody is looking at it.
Mustafa, I want to ask you this question. If no one is looking at the situation in the occupied Gaza Strip, then Turkey is one country that has been looking at the situation. Turkey has been sending humanitarian aid. What is Turkey's response over the latest attacks that Israel has conducted in the occupied Gaza Strip?
Israeli security forces have recently launched new ground operation in the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza Strip, and Turkish Foreign Ministry has recently issued a written statement condemning Israel's decision to expand its ground invasion in the Gaza Strip. Turkey is accusing Israel of obstructing the peace talks with Palestinian resistance group Hamas. As you know, right now, Egypt and Qatar are trying to facilitate and mediate any ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, but Israel's recent military operation in the region, I think, are threatening peace talks between Hamas and Israeli decision makers. Turkey is always reiterating its strong support for the Palestinian people, and Turkey has been always claiming that if the international community wants to see long-standing peace and stability in the Middle East, they are supposed to recognize the independence of the Palestinian state, and Turkey is always calling for a two-state solution to deal with the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. Within this context, I think Turkey will continue to take steps to increase international awareness about Israel's ethnic cleansing policies in the Gaza Strip. I think Turkey will continue to take tough measures against Israel and its supporters to put an end to the Israeli military offensive in the region.
Javed, tell me about the situation between Trump and these Arab states. Now, Trump was in the Middle East. He visited Qatar, he visited Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but he did not talk much about the situation in the occupied Gaza Strip. In fact, he talked about the Abraham Accords and how he wanted Saudi Arabia to be a part of those accords. How are you analyzing Trump's trip to the Middle East, where Gaza was not a topic that he touched upon with Arab leaders?
Well, I think apartheid Israel, and particularly Netanyahu, has become a bigger liability. And there are credible reports suggesting that Donald Trump is not in communication with the Netanyahu. Donald Trump wanted some kind of a peace agreement, some kind of arrangement. Netanyahu is not listening to anyone. He's pursuing his own fascist agenda. I think that is a part of the reason. But the bigger problem is that these Arab leaders are simply bribing President Donald Trump with a $3 trillion US. You see, that is a huge investment that is going to be there in the USA. For what? Why a part of money can influence such a, I mean, that part of the money can be used for the welfare of the Palestinians in a manner that is more tangible. But again, that is not the question. If they are using that kind of influence on President Donald Trump, when US is on a decline and Arabs are pumping money, but what is the benefit for their brothers, Arab brothers in the occupied Palestine? I think that needs to be looked at. Now you see, Donald Trump, when he was gifted with a personal plane, I mean basically to replace Air Force One, which presidents of the USA have been using. You know what was the reaction of the Donald Trump? He said, "I've been given this gift because I'm the president of Pakistan, president of the USA. If we don't provide you security, you won't exist here." You see, that is such a contemptuous remarks for these Arab leaders. Nonetheless, they were laughing, they were smiling, and I think they have not been able to use their clout on the USA to bring an end to this tragic genocide that is taking place, that is being live streamed. Journalists are being killed, aid workers are being killed, doctors are being killed, the entire infrastructure has been destroyed. They have not spared any hospital. But again, if you are going to hold accountable this apartheid state, then everyone who will do that, he would be sanctioned, he would be punished. Now it means that in the long run, this international order, so-called international order, which is already on the decline, I think this is going to collapse. As we speak, there is now no effective international order. And the biggest culprit to destroy that so-called international order of starting from the World War II, I think that is the apartheid Israel. And that is the reason being is that the West, more particularly the USA, has been accommodating apartheid Israel in a manner that has jeopardized the very stature of the USA as a so-called superpower. So I think, yes, Palestinians are being killed. Yes, there is a genocide, but at the same time, the public opinion has hugely turned against apartheid. Israel, in the long run, it would lose. People in the West, people in the USA, now there are loud voices why the US's policy, foreign policy, is being run by the Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Javed, you're in the Pakistani capital, and President Trump and Marco Rubio have also had a major influence in that region. They were behind the ceasefire that both of the countries have agreed to. Tell me about the situation between India and Pakistan, and what's the latest from the Pakistani capital?
Well, I think there is a calm between two as the ceasefire agreement now at least stands enforced, for at least for the time being. But I think India is not coming on the negotiating table. That's a bigger problem. UK, USA, they want India to negotiate with Pakistan to resolve their issues, though maybe bilaterally if the arbitration is a bad word for the Indians. But problem with India is that India considers itself that it is so big that it should not negotiate with Pakistan. Now, India and Pakistan is internationally being hyphenated after India's military was beaten up in a black and blue. Its air force was grounded because of the fear of Pakistan's air superiority. Very clearly, 6 fighter jets, including so-called Rafales of the imported from France, they were also shot down. So I think in that context, there is a shock and awe in India, and now they are gathering some courage to a new scenario where Pakistan has emerged militarily as something, an entity. It will have to negotiate, and it will have to resolve the bilateral dispute, the core dispute, which is a Kashmir dispute, either by holding a referendum there or holding direct negotiation with Pakistan. And India is behaving in a very contemptuous manner. It says that it has to be hyphenated with China, it's a big part, not to be hyphenated with Pakistan. I think this strategic arrogance that India has been displaying has actually brought it in a situation where internationally its a diplomatic so-called stature and its economic stature and so-called its military stature, I think that has started going down to the drain.
Political analyst Javed Rana, thank you for joining us from the Pakistani capital. Anews editor Mustafa Kocakinar, thank you to you as well.
You are welcome, Omar.
And that wraps up this edition of Turkey's Diplomacy. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with more insights.